Do you have those moments where you lay awake at night? Maybe there's something pressing on your mind that just keeps you awake. Is there something going on in your life that it's the last thing that you think about before you go to bed, and as soon as you wake up, it's the first thing that's on your mind? I know for me that when I'm in those situations and there's things that are pressing on me, and it's the last thing I think about, and it's the first thing I think about, I realize, okay, there's a problem here. This has moved in something that I need to do something about because it's having a significant impact on my life. And I wonder what those things are for you. You might not be experiencing that at the moment, or you might be in a season where actually things are difficult and you're experiencing high stress or high anxiety due to a bunch of things. Maybe it's money. Maybe you're in a situation and debts are rising or piling up around you, or you're concerned about mortgage rates going up. Maybe there's a big expense looming on the horizon and you're thinking, how on earth are we going to afford this? How are we going to make ends meet? Or maybe it's health. Maybe that's an issue that's keeping you awake at night, an undiagnosed issue, something going on that you're not sure what it is, or a condition that you're waiting for test results back from, and again, you're not sure what's going on. Maybe there's a new condition that you're just trying to get to grips with and learn, how do I live and reorder my life around this? Maybe it's an issue at work, something going stressful in your workplace, an issue with your kids, maybe another significant relationship, parents, siblings, an argument with your neighbors, with your in-laws. You can fill in the blank. You know, whatever it is, what are those things that keep you awake at night? What are those things that cause you stress and anxiety? Because here's the thing, we all have moments where we experience high stress or high anxiety moments. We all go through seasons of life, and if you're not in one now, the good news is at some point you will be experiencing that situation, and we feel stressed, we just feel maxed out. And it presents in different ways. The situations and the circumstances that make us feel anxious or cause us to be stressed are different. It presents in our bodies in different ways. But the truth is, at one point or another, we will find ourselves in high stress, high anxiety situations. And that's why we're spending a few weeks exploring this topic, which we're calling Peace. We're looking at faith, anxiety, and mental health. And we want to explore, how does our mental health intersect with our faith? And you might be somebody who's just visiting this morning. You might be somebody who's curious about faith, or just checking us out, not sure what you believe or whether you believe what we believe. We still think there's stuff in the things that we're going to talk about today that you can lean into, that you can apply, that will help you in your walk of life. Because when it comes to mental health, often, and it's good, things have shifted a lot in recent years, but there's still some baggage there that we recognize, or sometimes we think it's not okay for me to not be okay, that something's wrong with me, and you know, I shouldn't feel this way, I shouldn't be stressed, I shouldn't feel low, I shouldn't be anxious about stuff. And certainly if you're a person of faith, if you're a follower of Jesus, there can be moments or there can be a feeling where we think, actually, if I'm struggling with my mental health, then my faith has failed. We want to push back against some of those thoughts as we explore the things that we're exploring this morning. You know, we want FBC to be a place that is safe, where people can come and be open and honest and be real. You know, it's important to have those spaces where you can let your guard down, where you can be honest with yourself and you can be honest with the people around you, that you have a group or a community that have your back, and if you're struggling, that you can say with confidence, I'm struggling, I just need a little bit of support. And we want FBC to be one of those places. See, a key thing to remember is struggling with your mental health is not a sign that your faith has failed. You know, you wouldn't think that about your physical health. You know, if you've got a problem with your knee or with your arm, you wouldn't think, oh no, like I've got knee pain, that means my faith is failing. I don't believe in Jesus. We would never think that. So why do we think that when it comes to topics about stress or anxiety or depression? Well, partly because sometimes we've said some unhelpful things. There's been some very unhelpful things said about mental health by prominent Christians and say things that all you need to do is have more faith. All you need to do is trust more. All you need to do is believe more, and these things will go away. We say things like, you know, that anxiety or that depression or your mental health issue is just in your head. Like, Yes, that's why it's called mental health. That's like saying heart disease is just in your heart. Yes. Just because it's something we experience in our head doesn't mean it's not an issue, doesn't mean it's not something that actually we can just do this and fix it. No, there's conditions and things going on. So, if you're struggling with something to do with mental health at the moment, I want to say to you that is okay. It is okay to not be okay. It's not okay to stay there, though. So we want to look at how can we do things to actually help us move on. Just like if you had a problem with your leg or your arm or your heart or your kidneys, we do things to try and actually help us get the help that we need. And lots of stuff that we're talking about today, mental health is such a huge topic, and there's moments where we feel anxious and there's clinical anxiety. Those things are very different. And if you are struggling with your mental health, we would say to you, we are definitely not the experts. Go and seek professional help. Go to your GP. Check out the resources on the NHS website. You can just type in mental health and it give a whole load of resources. Mind are also an amazing organization that you could speak to, or go on their website and get a bunch of stuff. Get the help that you need. But the thing that we're going to look at today is recognizing that, it is okay. You can be a faithful follower of Jesus and experience stress or anxiety or depression. Actually, the first followers of Jesus, his disciples, found themselves in situations where they were anxious. They found themselves in situations where they were stressed out. And if the people who walked with Jesus had those moments, why do we think we would be any different? This morning, we're going to explore and encounter high stress situations that the first followers of Jesus had. And a guy called Mark has recorded these events for us. Mark wrote what we think is the first written account of the life of Jesus. We find them in the Bibles, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark is actually the first one written. And he was one of the first followers of Jesus. So after the disciples followed Jesus, and Jesus did all the things he did and was crucified and resurrected and ascended into heaven, and this new movement, which we now call the church or Christianity, exploded, Mark was one of those first people to follow Jesus. And he wrote this sort of eyewitness account. He spent time with Peter, and Peter shared the things that he saw and he heard and he witnessed through Jesus. So Mark's gospel is an eyewitness account of the things that Jesus said and the things that Jesus did, so that those people who first read it could understand this is who Jesus is and this is what it means for me to follow him. Anyway, let's take a look at the story, the account. It says, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. So they're on one side of the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus had just spent the time teaching to crowds, and evening came, he's like, right, I want to go from here and I want to go across to the other side of the lake. And so leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. And there were also other boats with him. And I love this line here that Mark records. The disciples take Jesus just as he was. I wonder what that means. Jesus has just had a busy day, ministering to crowds, teaching people, helping people, healing people. And he's probably tired. He's probably worn out from a busy day. They take him just as he is. They don't put expectations on him. They don't expect him to dress up or to be any different. Just as he is, they take him. They're willing to accept Jesus on his terms. I love that line, because this is something Jesus does for us, that he accepts us just as we are, that we can come to him just as we are, with all the good things and all the bad things, with all the baggage and the highs and the lows of life, that we don't have to put on a false front to Jesus, because he sees beyond it anyway, and he accepts us exactly as we are. The question I want you to think about quickly this morning is, are you willing to do the same for Jesus? Are you willing to accept him just as he is? Often we try and make Jesus a bit more convenient. We want to follow a convenient version of Jesus who always agrees with us, who will never make us or ask us to do something that's uncomfortable or push us out of our comfort zones, who will never challenge us about the things that we think or the things that we say or the things that we do. That is not Jesus. Jesus wants the best for you, and sometimes that means changing. Sometimes that means challenging. Sometimes that means prodding those aspects of your life, of our lives, that, let's be honest, we know we need to change. We know we need to grow in. But anyway, the disciples take Jesus just as he was, and he wanted to leave the crowd behind. He wants to get away to have some space for a moment. And Mark also tells us there were other boats with him as well. So even in this space, he's trying to retreat. He's trying to withdraw someone, just get some downtime. The crowd are still following him. So they set off. It's the end of the day, and they set off across the Sea of Galilee. And suddenly a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Now, the Sea of Galilee, because of the geometry and stuff going on, the high cliff faces and air pressure and all this sort of stuff that I don't really understand, means that storms are common. Like a storm could just roll in out of nowhere. So this is not an uncommon thing to happen in this region. But this is a big one. This storm is strong, and the waves are breaking over the boat, and the boat was nearly swamped. The boat is about to go under, it feels. So you can picture the scene, high winds, waves crashing up over the side of the boat. And, I think this is an anxious moment. I would be stressed in this situation. Where is Jesus? What is Jesus doing in the middle of this storm? Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. As I picture the scene, I picture the disciples running around frantically. Some of them are trying to tie things down. Others are bailing out waters. Others are just hanging on for dear life. And where's Jesus? Well, he's in the stern, and he's taking a nap on a cushion whilst all hell breaks loose. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" We see the level of stress and anxiety that's going on in them at the moment. And let's remember, actually, a lot of the disciples were fishermen. They spent their life on this sea. They had been in storms before. This wasn't the first storm they encountered, and it certainly wasn't the last storm they encountered. But maybe there's something different about this one, because they're in fear of their lives. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" See, we can experience different things. I've never been in the middle of a boat, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm before, but I've had experiences where it feels like I am. And this is an experience that they have experienced countless times before. But something is different about this one. And we can have that, things that we've experienced, things that we've encountered, things that we've gone through. And all of a sudden, the same thing happens, but this time it feels different. It seems different. We coped with it before, but this time it absolutely floors us. And, so I've never been in this situation. I've never been on a boat in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm, and I'm quite thankful that I've never been in that situation. But there's been seasons of my life where it feels like I am. There's been seasons of my life where problems and situations or circumstances rise up around me like the wind and the waves that these guys were experiencing. And I can't see a way out. The problem seems so big that all I can see is the waves. All I can feel is the wind and the rain beating against me. And I can't find a way out. And I think, I'm going under. I'm sinking. This boat is going down. And sometimes in those moments when I'm experiencing those high stress, high anxiety moments, it can sometimes feel, if I'm really honest, like Jesus is asleep on a cushion in the boat. And I want to go to him, and I want to shake him, and I want to wake him, and I want to point to the waves, and I want him to show him the effect of the wind, and I want to say to him, "Jesus, can't you see what's going on? Can't you see what I'm facing? Can't you see what I'm going through? Don't you care if I drown?" Here's a question that I've often wondered. Why is Jesus asleep? It's the middle of the night, so he's tired, but a storm is happening. The wind and the waves are crashing over the boat. These trained fishermen think the boat is going under. Why is Jesus asleep in the middle of the storm? Well, simply because he's not worried or concerned. He sees what they don't see. He knows what they don't know. And all they can see is the wind and the waves. All they can see is the problem in front of them. But Jesus sees something different. And Jesus sees beyond the sea of their problems. And they wake him, and he gets up and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. I wonder what it was like for the disciples at this moment. They were terrified before, and they wake Jesus. "Jesus, teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And he rises to his feet and he just says, "Quiet, be still." He rebukes the wind and the waves, and all of a sudden, the wind stops. All of a sudden, the rain stops. All of a sudden, these big high waves stop, and it becomes like a mill pond. The rough sea becomes calm, and there is peace. They were scared before. I bet they are absolutely terrified now. They were terrified. See, I told you, they were terrified. They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Sometimes when we find ourselves in those situations and we want Jesus to speak quiet, be still to those situations and think, "Jesus, don't you care? Can't you see what I'm facing? Can't you see what's going on?" And actually, I sometimes wonder, what would it be like if Jesus did do that? What would it be like if Jesus did do the things that I'm asking for? I think, it'll be nice, I'll be at peace, everything will be calm. I think I'd be terrified as well in those moments. You see, we might not physically be on a boat in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm, but sometimes it can feel that way. And there's things that were true in this physical encounter that are also true in those encounters that we have, and those things that perhaps are in your mind right now as we're talking about those things that cause you high stress or high anxiety, those things that make it feel like the waves are rising up against you, and Jesus is just asleep and he doesn't care if you're going under. I want to point to a couple of things that were true for the disciples that I think are true for us in those high stress, high anxiety situations we find ourselves in. Firstly, Jesus is in our boat. Whatever it is you are facing, whatever boat you're in, whatever storm you are facing, know this: Jesus is in it with you. Jesus is in there with you, whether you believe in him or not. He never left them, and he won't leave you. And sometimes anxiety can whisper to us that we're alone. We saw that last week as Tim led us through the story of Elijah. If you didn't catch that, I really encourage you to check that out. Just go to the hub, as Naomi was talking about it earlier, and click on Sunday's talk, and you can listen back or watch that message back. But sometimes when we find ourselves in these high stress moments, sometimes when we're feeling anxious, we can have that voice that whispers to us that we're on our own, that we've been abandoned, that we're left to face this by ourselves. We are not alone. Jesus is in the boat with you. And there's something else that's true about Jesus in our boat, is Jesus cares. Their question is often our question: don't you care? Can't you see what I'm facing? Why don't you do something about the problem that is in front of me? And throughout the Gospels, throughout those biographical accounts of the life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if you've never read them, read them. We've got 3 copies of Luke out in reception. Grab one and flick it through. You will see the compassion of Jesus time and time again. You will see Jesus moved by the things that cause problem and stress and anxiety for people. He cares deeply. But, Jesus might not be troubled by the things that trouble you. He's not troubled by the storm that the disciples are facing. But that doesn't mean he doesn't care about them. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't care about you. Jesus may not be troubled by the storm that you are facing. He might be able to see beyond the wind and the waves that you can't see past. But that doesn't mean he doesn't care about you. And the third thing that was true for them, that is true for us, is Jesus can speak peace. The first thing Jesus does as they shake him and they wake him is that he stands up and he says, "Quiet, be still." But let's be honest, this is where I think our experience probably often differs from their experience. The situations that we find ourselves that make us feel like we're in the middle of a boat, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm, storm, debt, the things that we talked about before, an ongoing argument, a health scare, whatever it is, that anxiety and that stress that is rising up around you, whatever the situation that causes you to feel like the wind is beating against you and the waves are crashing over your boat, whatever the situation that you find yourself in, that you want to go to Jesus and it feels like he's asleep and you're trying to shake him and wake him and you just want to shout at him in that situation, the problem, the anxiety that you're facing, you want to go to him and you want Jesus to wake up and to speak to the wind and the waves that are causing you stress. You want him to say, quiet, be still, to the storm that is raging around us. In my experience, that when I've had those times, is Jesus hasn't done that. The wind and the waves continue to beat. I believe that Jesus can speak peace and bring peace into my situation, but what I have never experienced when I've been in the storms of life is Jesus waking up and speaking. All I want him to do is to declare with all authority, quiet, be still, and that those waves and those wind cease. But he doesn't. The waves still crash, the wind still beats against us. That's never happened for me. There's never been a miraculous calm to the storm that I've faced. But instead, when I go to him and I shake him and I wake him and I cry out to him, Jesus, don't you care if I drown? Instead, he stands before me and instead of looking at the wind and the waves that are causing me stress and causing me anxiety and causing me pain, he looks into the depth of my soul. And instead of speaking to the wind and the waves around me, he speaks to the depth of my soul. Quiet. Be still. And I've had those moments, and I'm sure you've had those moments, when it feels like we're going under and nothing changes. Like, Jesus, where are you? Don't you care? Can't you see what I'm facing? Can't you see what I'm experiencing? It feels like you're asleep on a cushion. Can't you stop this thing that I'm experiencing, that I'm encountering? And I've noticed there's been times, and often it's when I look back, that I've been aware of the presence of God with me in that boat. And the waves still crash over, the wind still beats against me. But he's spoken quiet to the depth of my soul. And I've experienced a peace that I can't quite explain. I remember when Leah, our daughter, was born. She's almost 22, but I remember it quite vividly. Louise was at home. She was about to go out to work. She worked evenings at a youth club, and she was in the kitchen making a toasted sandwich. And she just calls out to me, and I'm trying to watch Hollyoaks or something on the TV. I'm like, oh, what's going on? And I walk into the kitchen, and she's having a seizure on the floor. Again, emotional. It's like 22 years ago. In that moment, like, my whole world was about to come crashing down around me. And like, oh, what do you do? And as I think about this now, and I think, that would cause me panic, that would cause me stress, that would cause me anxiety. Like, what would I do? In that moment, Jesus spoke those words to the depth of my soul, quiet, be still. And this peace came over me, which I can't describe, I can't define, but somehow, I was able to get Louise into the recovery position. I was able to call an ambulance. I was able to text her work to say she wasn't coming in. I was able to turn off the toasted sandwich maker, and the ambulance came, took her off to hospital. Leah was born by an emergency C-section a couple of hours later. My whole life was collapsing in around me. Yet in the midst of that storm, I experienced peace, calmness, quiet, be still. And I remember when I got home the next day and, I was exhausted, wanted to go to bed. The first thing I did was went to that sandwich toaster and threw it in the bin. Thought, nah, never having that again. That's ruined for me. But what are those moments for you? I've had many situations, well, not many. I've had, thankfully, just a few situations since then when it literally feels like I'm going under. And Jesus, what are you doing? Don't you care if I drown? Can't you stop the wind? Can't you stop the waves? And he's never for me, and I'm sure maybe there's stories where he has for you, but for me, he's never stopped the wind. He's never stopped the waves. But he gives peace into the depth of my soul. And somehow I know it will be okay. Even if the outcome is not what I want, I know it will be okay because what he sees is not what I see. What he knows is not what I know, and I trust him. So, what do we do when we feel ourselves in the midst of the storm? Let me really quickly give you 3 things I think we can apply when we find ourselves in these high anxious, high stress situations. The first one is to name it. Identify whatever it is that is causing you grief. And often, the thing that is causing you stress and anxiety, the thing that's making you feel low, is not the immediate problem that is happening around you. Something has triggered this, and it's causing this reaction within you. Take time to identify it. Take time to name it. Be honest with yourself and be honest with God. Be open with him and say, God, look, this is what's going on. This is what I'm feeling. You don't have to put on a false front. You don't have to say glamorous or eloquent prayers. You can just have to identify what is the wind, what is the waves that is causing me problems. So name it. And then the second thing is breathe. We used to say this all the time to the kids when they were younger and they'd hurt themselves. And you do the silent crying, that? You like this? And the thing we're saying, just breathe, it will be okay. Sometimes we need to just breathe. Our bodies, when we face high stress, high anxiety situations, we have a physiological reaction. We need to take time to lower our heart rate. We need to take time to allow the adrenaline to settle down. So when you find yourselves in those situations and it feels stressful, it feels anxiety, breathe. Let me give you a real simple prayer that you can do as you breathe. So breathe in and breathe out. And as you breathe in, say, Jesus, you are in the boat. And as you breathe out, say, give me your peace. And just repeat that over and over again. Jesus, you are in the boat. Give me your peace. Jesus, you are in the boat. Give me your peace. And all we're doing is giving ourselves some space. We're giving ourselves some time. We're orientating ourselves to fix our eyes on Jesus rather than the wind and the waves around us. And then the third thing that we can do is we can get help. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay there. And sometimes we need more help. Faith does not replace the need for medical or for psychological support. Faith can sit alongside therapy, alongside medication, alongside professional care. And there's a big difference between feeling anxious and clinical anxiety. Stressful situations produce a stressed response in us. So it's important that we get help for those things. We're going to get the band back up on stage as we wrap up our time together. So, I'm not sure what you're facing. I'm not sure what you're experiencing at the moment. You might be in a season of your life where it feels just like the disciples. You're in that boat. It's the middle of the night and the storm is beating against you. The waves are crashing over you and it feels like you're going under. I encourage you to do this. Name it. What is it? What is the thing that is causing you pain? What is the thing that is causing you stress and anxiety? Name it. And then find some space to breathe. Just give yourself time and space. Give yourself time to orientate or reorientate yourself towards Jesus, to look to him and to focus on him rather than focusing on the wind and the waves of the problem. And then beyond that, get help, whatever that might look like. And that depends on what it is that you're experiencing. That depends on what it is that you're encountering. Again, there's a difference between feeling anxious and clinical anxiety. There's a difference between feeling low and feeling depressed and experiencing clinical depression. And wherever you are on that spectrum means you need different things. You need different ways of helping. If you're at this end and you need extra support, seek that extra support. That can sit alongside your faith and your journey with Jesus. But whatever it is that you are experiencing or will experience, whatever it is that you're going through, will go through, remember this. Anxiety may shout loud, but Jesus is in my boat. Anxiety may shout loud. It may be like the wind and the waves crashing over the side of the boat. But remember, Jesus is in my boat. Let's pray. Father God, I thank you so much that you never leave us, that whatever we experience, you journey with us. In the highs of life and the lows, In the calm and in the storm, you are there with us. And I pray that when we find ourselves in those high stress, those high anxiety moments, to remember that you are there with us. And when it feels that you're asleep and that you don't care, Lord, I thank you that we can go to you and we can cry out to you. And I pray that in those moments, you'd help us experience peace, that you'd help us experience calm, even if nothing changes around us. Help us to experience that in the depths of our souls. Thank you, Lord.